thank you all for inviting me to speak to you today. And it's a pretty big day because it's the first day of spring, so we can celebrate that and hope the warming trend continues. Yes. I would like to thank Suzette for making this happen today. And yes, the elephants are coming. And this project has kind of taken on a life of its own. And I'd like to thank a few people that have made it possible. First of all, the Copeland Family Foundation funded the elephant topiaries that will be exhibited at the duck pond in the cemetery. I would also like to thank Joan Clifford, who has been very supportive and inspirational since the beginning of this project. I'd like to thank a group of women who came together to help me enrich this project and to publicize it, and that would be Suzette Standring and Maria Karagianis, Mary Alice Gallagher, and Joan Clifford. And lastly, takes a village, President Ken Quigley of Curry College, the Friends of the Milton Public Library, and the Friends of the Milton Cemetery, who have funded a flight here for Carol Bradley from Montana. And she's coming in April to speak to the Milton Public Library author series. She's the author of Last Chain on Billy, which I will talk to you about a little bit later. So this project came about quite by chance. I was trying to think of some garden art exhibit to have for the cemetery, and I saw this photo online, and it was of topiary elephants on the grounds of a castle in the United Kingdom. And I'm like, oh, that would be really cool to have a couple elephants by the pond. And I called the nonprofit organization that sponsored this exhibit, and here we go. It was the United Kingdom Survival Tour. And they had these dozen or so elephants on a flatbed truck, and they took them from town to town as part of an educational exhibit. To educate people about the plight of the Asian elephant. So I called this nonprofit and asked them a bit about their work and where they got their elephant topiaries. And they told me they got them from Topiary Joe out of Tennessee. So I'm like, yes, at least on this side of the pond, I can work with him. So I contacted Topiary Joe, and we spoke about sizes and prices, and I applied for a grant to the Copeland Foundation, and they were generous enough to fund the elephant topiaries and some restoration of the pond area to a more natural state. So the topiaries will be under construction beginning April 5th if the weather is with us. The way the frames are here, they need to be filled with sphagnum moss and then Baltic ivy planted all around them. So we have two, an African life-size elephant, a mother and a baby. And yeah, there's just two, yes. If you want to contribute a third, we'll talk about that later. I thought they were quite whimsical, and I decided I should delve into it a little bit more and learn more about elephants. Because first of all, I had to talk to my board about putting elephants at the pond, and they were going to ask, and they did, elephants at the pond? What do they have to do with cemeteries? Well, as we all know, elephants never forget. And the cemetery is a place of remembrance. So that simple connection was something that was good enough for the board, and they said, go ahead with it. It sounds like a nice project. I wanted to find out a little bit more about elephants, should people ask. And this is what I discovered. Elephants are the only other mammals, other than humans, that have a death ritual. When an elephant dies, the herd that they're with usually try to lift up the elephant. They'll try to get him to stand again. And when they realize that the elephant is futile, they slowly go to collect leaves and branches, and they start to put those on top of the elephant as a form of burial. And they have a unique remembrance. They revisit the grave, they revisit where the elephant has died up to years afterwards. So I thought that was a pretty good connection with cemeteries. Went the wrong way. Okay. Now, a lot of you might know these facts about elephants, But they travel around in family herds, and they're mostly female herds. The male babies leave when they're teenagers, between the age of 13 to 15. So all of these herds of elephants you see are usually just women, their aunts, grandmothers, nieces, nephews. It's a matriarchal society. Normally the oldest and largest female elephant becomes the matriarch, and the herd follows her instructions as far as like when they can move and where they should go next. She keeps the memory of where to obtain water and food in times of drought, and she's kind of in charge of her herd. They have done studies of elephants, and they've also seen how they can remember people and other elephants that they haven't seen in over 20 years. So they have a long-term memory, not just an ecological one, but one of a memory of other animals. And they do feel the emotions of happiness, sadness, fear, despair, and grief. I thought this was very awesome. Their communication skills are much different than ours and much more refined, I guess. I mean, we can talk a lot, but we can't pound the ground and have another person get the message 20 miles away, which they can. It's a subsonic communication that is too low for the human ear to hear. But they vocalize through a lot of sounds, whether it's trumpeting, a rumbling, their subsonic communication. And they pick up these messages from far away because they have very sensitive feet. And the feet can pick up the messages and send it to their brain. Okay, this woman, Joyce Poole, she's done a lot of research. You could go online to Elephant Voices, and you'd learn an awful lot about elephants. She's been studying them since she was a young woman, and she's now in her mid-60s, I believe, and still living in Amboseli Park and studying elephants. So she's pretty much of an expert on their behavior. So she has recorded all their different sounds and has researched what the sounds mean. The types of elephants that exist today are the African bush elephant. One is a savanna elephant. It's probably the one that people are most familiar with the big ears and kind of a straight back. There's the African forest elephant, which, as the word says, it's a forest elephant. They live in the forest, and they do a lot of good for the ecology of the forest because they knock down trees, which brings light to the floor of the forest, and just the processes of their eating and the dung that comes from them, it helps other organisms live, and they can disperse seeds that way all over Africa. They're different from the bush elephant because they're just a little bit smaller, and they have downward-facing tusks. And then there's the Asian elephant, which has more of a bumpy forehead. That's its, most the characteristic that you notice most in the difference between that and African elephant. Asian elephants live in Asia. I think the greatest number is in India, and there's some in Thailand. They used to live all over China, but those are all gone now. So their habitat is dwindling. The savanna elephants are found in different areas in Africa, but a lot of the countries don't have even one anymore. They've been poached for their tusks because it brings a lot of money in. Like in Uganda, I think it was Idi Amin, he slaughtered a lot of the elephants just to fund his war against his people, and now there's 25 elephants left in Uganda. And if anybody wants to ask a question while we're going on, just interrupt me or tell me if you can't hear or I'm speaking too quickly. This is the most significant challenge that elephants face today is the poaching crisis. There have been waves of poaching over the years in the 1800s and then in the 1980s until it was made illegal, and now it's become another crisis bigger than before, which started in 2002, so it's been going on for quite a few years. An African elephant is killed every 15 minutes for its tusk. It's awful. And this is the PG version, because I've seen some movies online of what they look like after they've been slaughtered, and it's just terrible. There's a lot of efforts going into to stop the poaching, but there's still a demand for it. And as long as there's a demand, there's going to be people trading in illegal wildlife trafficking. The tusks are worth more than gold. And for some uneducated young men who live in Africa who don't have a whole lot of options for making money, it's a quick steal for them. They might get $90 to $100 for the tusks that are sold for far more than that when they're shipped over to Vietnam. But the value of an elephant to the economy of Africa and to ecotourism is worth about $400,000 for each elephant and the people who come to visit. So if they lose elephants, they lose tourists. So the long-term effect, I mean, these people are thinking of what they need today for money. They're not thinking of the long term and how the country should survive. And so they're doing a lot of education in Africa with young people and trying to teach them to appreciate the elephant and giving them other ways to make income. There's a lot more income for rangers who are also, they're under fire a lot of times because of the work they do in trying to stop illegal poaching. And from what I've read, a lot of the money made from the poaching trade funds, like the Lord Resistance Army and Abu Shabab, that's some, yes.
Do they have to kill the elephant to get the tusks?
Yes.
They can't get the tusks without killing the elephant?
No, they shoot the elephant and then they just cut his face off more or less and take the tusks. Yes.
Do they form relationships with humans as a dog does?
They do. They do that. I can give you a whole book list of one interesting book was The Elephant Whisperer. This man who started a reserve in South Africa, and he was asked to take on a herd of elephants that were rogue elephants, and they were eating the farmland around in the area they were. So he agreed to take them, and he had them shipped to his reserve. And slowly over years, he got to know all of them. And it depends upon the human, because they're losing their faith in humans. Humans are their only enemy. But it was interesting. He used to go to Europe on business, or to England, and the day he was coming back, and it had like a 3,000 acre reserve, the elephants would always be waiting for him at the house. They had, and they just had a sense that he was coming back. His last trip abroad, he unexpectedly died, and the elephants came up to the house that night and stayed there, and they've been coming there once a year on his anniversary ever since. So they have some kind of sense that nobody has really understood yet, but that's why people. Yeah, he did actually one time. He said that it was really spooky. He was supposed to come from England, and he was at the airport, and his flight got canceled. And his wife said that the elephants were halfway up to the lodge, and all of a sudden they stopped, turned around, and went back, like they knew his flight got canceled. The true stories are folklore, I'm not sure. That's what he wrote in his autobiography. So the ivory trade, as I said, there's a lot of profit to be made, and the governments are trying to figure out the best way to handle it. By burning the ivory and crushing it, they're trying to make it worthless for people to take. But there's so many elephants died for these tusks.
I think of how many elephants died to produce that.
It's awful.
Why don't they just not export it?
Oh, it's illegal to export it.
Yeah, but I thought you said that that's what they were exporting it to, like, Vietnam?
They export it illegally in ships to Vietnam, so they have to put it in hidden cargo. They're not allowed to do that. They allowed them back in 1998, I believe, to get rid of some of the stockpiles of ivory. So at first the poachers were saying, "Oh no, this is old ivory that we're sending." So, but now they're tagging different elephants. They know where the tusks come from. But it's been going on for a long time. This is the 1800s in the United States ivory trade, when, from what I read, between the African slaves, and they would be taken from the continent carrying tusks of ivory on their back and then being shipped to America. So it's a point of education. There's some people in China that buy it because it's a status symbol, but now that they're educating them that an elephant does die, they thought it was just taken from graveyards. They did initiate a ban as of the end of this year for ivory and the purchase of ivory in Africa. In Vietnam is where they finish it a lot. Vietnamese artists will make it into trinkets and things that are saleable in China. So there's organizations that are working to educate other countries. I mean, like our country is educated, though we still trade ivory from state to state. There's no law against that, but we're not supposed to import it. But these are before people knew. It was just, they were just harvesting this as if it was any other kind of agriculture. This town, has anybody ever heard of Deep River, Connecticut? I hadn't either, but this is where hundreds of thousands of tusks were manufactured into billiard balls, piano keys, combs, and trinkets. And I never knew they had the history there, but. No, this is a really uplifting subject, isn't it? African anti-poaching efforts. So these are the following organizations that are working to end poaching and to educate. They're all on Charity Navigator, and they have a 4 out of 4 rating, which is the highest you can get, because you have to be careful about startup nonprofits that say they're helping elephants, and make sure that the money that they're raising is actually going all to program. Ian Douglas Hamilton is probably the father of studying African elephants. He went to Africa as a young man and raised his family there. And he began the organization called Save the Elephants. It's part of the World Conservation Network. And any donations to him go through the Elephant Crisis Fund. Leonardo DiCaprio has started a foundation helping different wildlife. I know he helps elephants a lot and rhinos. Both are on the edge of extinction. He recently gave $1 million to Ian Douglas Hamilton's Save the Elephants. The Elephant Crisis Fund is just the fund that accepts the money, and 100% of that money goes to ending poaching. The babies are beautiful, aren't they? Oh, I didn't tell you this. Now, their pregnancy, an elephant's pregnancy lasts 22 months. And then she gives birth to a 200-pound baby. But at least the baby can walk right away. And then they stay together for life, the mother and child. It's a female child. She stays with her mother for life. So there are some issues with the fact that these female elephants are poached and they're dead and they have a newborn.
When does the newborn start to grow the ivory tusk?
I don't know the answer to that. So this is an autobiography of Dame Daphne Sheldrick, and she was married to David Sheldrick, and he died a few years back. Her work is also anti-poaching efforts, but she has started an orphanage for elephants whose mothers have been killed, because otherwise they'd starve. They have formulas that are made up for them that they can get by on, and they're kept at the Sheldrick Trust for however long it takes for the elephant to go back to the wild and live on its own. So they don't want to make pets out of them, they're just trying to help them survive. And Wild Aid, Peter Knights, he's the CEO of that. His organization, which has a lot of celebrities, it has a celebrity link. It's called Not on My Planet, KNOT, Not on My Planet, if you wanted to watch that online. And they have done a lot of work in China educating the Chinese that it's not right, it's not morally right to take an elephant's life just for ivory. We have plastic nowadays. We can use that for all the same purposes. Okay, captive elephants in the Americas. There's a long history of elephants, baby elephants being taken from Asia and Africa and kept in zoos on display for people or in circuses to entertain people. This is, that picture's from Montana back in 1890 or something like that. The other one's just women on an elephant. So captive circus elephants. The one on the left is doing something that elephants don't do. In order to teach them these tricks, they go through a lot of torture. And they don't have, they're left to stand in rooms they're small corrals with concrete floors. And as I told you, their feet are very sensitive. And they're made to move around on soft ground and always to be moving. So Lola on the right, she was rescued, I don't know how long after that picture, by the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. This is another sanctuary in the United States. There's 2 accredited sanctuaries for elephants in the United States. One is the Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary, and the other one is PAWS, the Performing Animal Welfare Society, and that's in San Andreas, California. They actually go out and try to get some of the owners of these elephants to give them up. They try to buy them so that they can retire them. So these elephants don't perform anymore. They're just in retirement. Here's a group, the Hawthorne Five, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service took away from the company that was running this because they had been put in a barn in upstate Illinois because they had become non-cooperative as performers. And the Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary took them in as well. Poor Billy's on the right. Billy is an elephant that Carol Bradley, the author who Becoming, did a lot of research on. And she wrote that book, Chain on Billy, when he got to the sanctuary. So he was considered, he was taken when he was a baby. He went to the Mendon Zoo until he got too big to give kids rides. So they sent him to Florida. Way to go. Florida, where he performed late 1960s. So he performed for, they call her Billy, but they're all girls. I should let you know they're all girls, these poor elephants that are captured, because they're more docile and easier to train than the bull elephants. So she was sent to a barn upstate Illinois, and I believe that she was there for 12 to 15 years in a corral, and nothing was done for her until the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service closed down that organization that owned her. And here's Billy today at the Tennessee Sanctuary. She's having a great time. They live almost as long as a human. They have, by the time they get to the sanctuary, they have a lot of problems. They're kind of crippled because of their feet. The feet problems are the worst.
I don't see any tusks.
Yeah, I was just.
The female Asian elephants don't have tusks.
Oh,
Yeah. The males do, and then both African elephants do. Yeah, that's another difference I forgot to tell you about. But I have recently become a volunteer at the Tennessee Sanctuary, so I'm going down there in June to visit. So our job is to educate and fundraise for all things elephants. You'll notice any of these nonprofits are very generous with each other. They're not looking just give the money to me. Anything that has to do with helping elephants in the world, they promote that cause. So this Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary established in 1995, and it's licensed, accredited. Right now they have 11 elephants. I think they've taken in something like 32 over the years. You can go to elephants.com online, and if you're lucky enough, they have Elicams. So you can see the elephant walk by if you get them at the right time. That's on all day. So the Asian elephant, Shirley, she's 68. I think she's the oldest. And Tara's 42. Winky and Sissy. There's Billy and Minnie. Debbie and Ronnie.
what's their age?
These are 45 and 50.
No, but I mean, how long, what's their span?
I think they can live up till 80 years old.
They what?
I think they can live up till 80 years old. They feed them some food that's prepared for them, and then they can digest a lot of things. They knock down trees and eat the roots, and they eat the leaves. They eat a lot of stuff you'd think was indigestible, but that's what they like to do. Then they supplement their diet with other things. They said they feed them like 200 pounds of food a day. But I've read that, an African elephant, when it's out in the wild, will eat 300 to 400 pounds a day. And so that presents another problem because there's a conflict with the farmers. A farmer can plant his crop for the year, and a herd of elephants can come through, and his whole year's crop is gone in one night. So they are doing some unique things, such as setting up barriers between the elephants and the settlements. They're afraid of bees. Elephants are very much afraid of bees, so they have beehives, and they won't cross over those. When they can afford it, they'll have electric fencing, but they're trying to keep that conflict down because the farmers will shoot them if they find them eating their whole crop for the year. Is the African residents of the Tennessee Elephant Sanctuary. Everybody calls it Tess, I guess. Tanji and Flora, and Sukari. It's pretty big. It's 2,700 acres. They have 3 heated barns, so they can come into the barns when the weather gets too cold. And they just did that by itself. So they have veterinarians on staff, and they clean their feet, as you can see, with a protected cage. And they're pretty well cared for. You're not allowed to visit the sanctuary because these animals have been performing for life, so they're in retirement now. But they do have a visitor center that has a lot of information that you can visit in downtown Hohenwald, Tennessee. That more or less speaks for itself. All right, this is the book. I have this book available for sale. If anybody wants it, you could just make out a check to Carol Bradley or just take a look through it. Suzette's read it, and I've read it, and it's very well researched. Carol Bradley was a reporter for years. She became a Nieman Fellow at Harvard and took a course in animal law. And from then on, she said, I just want to research how animals are treated in captivity. So her book is very well researched and historical. And that's the end of it. So I just want to read something that Henry Beston wrote, the author of The Outermost House, and then I'm done here, unless you have questions. About animals, it says, we patronize them for their incompleteness, for their tragic fate of having taken form so far below ourselves. And therein we err, and greatly err, for the animals shall not be measured by man. In a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained. Living by voices we shall never hear. They are not brethren, they are not underlings. They are other nations caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth. Henry Beston, The Outermost House. I thought that was nice. Thanks.